So I can intro this on
Great.
because I have things to say actually.
Oh.
Well, I have something I want to say.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of SYD Life. I'm Charlotte and here with Tyler.
Hello.
And we are going to be talking about being anxious about setting up a budget today. So stay tuned.
I was going to do a jingle.
Every time. Every time. I think I've edited out us singing a jingle every single
Really?
time. Literally every time.
I need the compilation. I need it.
That's a good idea.
I need it.
Well, before we get into things,
Mm.
we're in spring currently.
Are
And you
we?
know what
Yeah.
happens? I mean, it's
been wild.
It's been wild, actually. But the thing that happens in spring is that the ibises come back out.
Okay.
I
I saw 4 bin chickens
hate them.
in the way in today.
No.
4.
And okay. I have so much to talk about with these things.
Yeah, talk to me.
I literally, they are the reason I, despise the entire bird race.
Wow.
Because they are so, so scary.
Wow.
They could kill you just by looking into their eyes. Honestly.
Really beady little eyes as well.
And you know what is horrendous?
Oh my gosh.
I talk a lot about my Scottish relatives on this podcast.
Yeah. Your twice removed cousins.
Literally.
Yep.
One of them, Blair, he just recently got a giant tattoo
of a bin chicken.
of a bin chicken on his
Why?
leg. Let me show you.
Wait, ibis in Scotland as well?
No.
Oh.
He really likes the band, the Australian band DMAs, and on one of their album covers
Is a bin chicken.
is a bin chicken.
I don't understand. It's not even. It's scary.
It's so
It's
scary.
It's etched
I
in
literally
blood or something.
he
Wow.
told me maybe January last year that he was going to get it, and I was expecting a little thing on his arm, and I was like, oh, that would be
It's
funny.
a full thigh.
It's a full thigh,
Full
and it's
thigh. No.
I was like, you don't understand how much I hate those birds.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
it's upper thigh as well, so put that thing away.
Totally.
Unless you're in some budgies at the beach. I don't want to see your upper thigh bin chicken.
It's crazy.
Oh.
And I'm just I often am in arguments because he tries. I'm like,
Wow.
we don't like Bondi Beach as Sydney siders because I believe that there are so
way
many
better
beaches.
beaches. Yes.
And we don't like bin chickens in
Yes.
Australia because they are terrifying. And
Yes.
he constantly picks those two things to tell me how much
my
he loves
thing,
them.
if we're on the bin chicken hate train, I would like to get on at the They Stink station.
Really? I haven't
They
noticed that.
stink. Are you
I
kidding?
don't get close enough.
There is
to
a
them to find that out.
waft around a bin chicken.
Really?
I think that's why I mean, they live half their life in a bin and they don't wash.
I've never joined the dots. I've never joined the dots. So that's why they're called bin chickens.
I think so. I went
Well,
to
that makes sense because they.
Yeah.
Were you about to say I went to Japan? Because we know.
Joke's on you. No, I was going to say I went to UCID.
Yes.
And
everywhere.
well, it became ironically their mascot. And so they started doing
Right.
ibis murals,
No.
ibis cafes.
They don't need
ibis
any more attention.
No.
They don't need. I feel I'm sorry, Blair, because I feel he maybe wanted me to bring that up in maybe a better light.
How though?
I don't know. You know what? No.
Here's my list of top 10 great tattoos.
I've been very upfront with him. I tried to convince him for a very long time to not get it because I personally believe that all Australians aren't going to find it. But he met the DMAs, and I think he had the tattoo at that point, and they loved it. So
So can I what?
Check.
Just to redeem the bird race, what is one bird you like? Because there's some cute birds.
I'm not a bird watcher like your
Full
father.
stop. No, that's all right. You know,
or Alex
called-
Buncombe,
they're
previous
called,
SYD Life host.
they're called twitchers, by the way. No, wait.
What?
Tweeters? Twitchers?
I don't know.
People who go bird watching.
Are they not just called bird watchers?
It's like real life Pokemon.
I just I can't. I don't get it. I guess I kind of like kookaburras. Because if I was an animal, I think I would be a kookaburra.
Noisy.
Noisy and like a ridiculous laugh that everyone's
Big
like,
beaked.
please
Big
shut up.
beaked.
I think that's the only one.
I love a good parrot, to be honest.
Parrots.
Yeah, they're like colourful, exotic.
They're the ones that talk back at you, hey? So maybe I'd
Some
also
of
be a
them.
parrot.
Yes.
I guess I identify a lot.
Jenny's? Yappa, yappa, yappa. Yeah.
What?
Yappa, yappa. I don't know.
Okay. Well, anyway.
Yeah.
We are joined by a really good guest today.
I can't wait for this.
Like, I have been trying to get this episode happening for like 4 months.
Yep.
Like I've been like the amount of emails I sent, the amount of LinkedIn connections I made. Yeah. But we landed with Sam Richards.
Yes.
Who is an amazing financial advisor. Yeah. But it's really purpose driven and like does responsible investing. It's such a good conversation. So I really hope you guys enjoy. We'll just hand straight over.
Great.
Hi everyone, I'm now joined with Sam Richards, who works in the financial advisory space with a great focus on responsible investment, purpose. But today we're here to talk about kind of your own personal journey with budgeting and financing. So do you want to kind of just like give us a quick introduction into maybe how your budgeting journey has evolved throughout your life?
Yeah, no, thank you, Charlotte, and really excited to be here. It's a really important part of anyone's sort of their financial life is informed, it does enable their broader life. So this has been a really big part of what I've wrestled with, had to learn, evolve, and some part of what I do actually comes out of how I've started to connect my values with my relationship with money. So I guess as a young person beginning out, it was really about survival to begin with.
Totally.
My first budget was really just about paying the rent, getting through, making sure I had enough money for food, maybe occasionally going out, and then getting through the month. And honestly, living month to month and just making it work. And I feel like that's a story that's playing out across Australia more broadly at the moment.
Yeah.
And there's lots of reasons for that when it comes to interest rates and inflation and cost of living more generally. But I guess when you ask me how did my budgeting approach evolve, I guess my life evolved a little bit, and I started to think beyond the month to month and surviving to what does it actually look like to thrive, and how do I plan for that, and how do I connect with that, and so started to think about longer term horizons, like what does it look like to go from a month to maybe a quarter, you know, extraordinary 3 months.
Yeah.
What if I could save some money along the way in that 3 months? What if I expanded that over time to 12 months? And then, you know, you do take a moment in your life when you start to think about, hang on, this 12-month horizon is useful because it's paying for my rent. You know, it's making sure I get fed. I get to see my mates a little bit. But it's a very much, it's a little more than surviving, but it's a little bit selfish in some ways.
Totally.
You know? Yeah. And selfish is not bad. Selfish is about understanding what your purpose looks like and how you connect that to what you actually want your life to reflect. And so really kind of reflecting on that, I guess, as a starting point, which started to shape my relationship with money. Because it started to come back to this idea that I was motivated to live in a certain way. Some of that, for me personally, is connected to my faith and how I hope to live that out. Yeah. Some of that is connected to my broader sense of values, how I'd been brought up and what I saw was good for the world more generally. And of course, those two things intersect. And you start to go, money's a big driver of that. Yeah. Not just for me at the personal level, Charlotte, but in the world more generally. Yeah. Right? And so you start to think about not only your horizons, but actually what am I doing along the way of the journey? You know, not what am I saving, what am I building towards, and then what is the purpose of that destination in some ways. So you start to have conversations with yourself first, and then you start to talk to your friends, and maybe a partner comes along who becomes a wife, and you start to think through what do you want your life to look like? Yeah. And you start to try to connect the mechanics of a budget, which is as simple as understanding what your income could be and what your expenses could be, with some of these broader conversations around what your purpose could and should be, you know? Yeah. And so my budget approach started with simple survival, evolved to doing a little bit more than that, maybe not quite flourishing, but certainly doing more than surviving. Yeah. And then started to infuse it with purpose. And then that became a much more complicated conversations about how I hope to have my values reflected in my relationship with money and therefore my budget.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It's just, getting that like bigger perspective, right? Just like a bigger, looking forward, not just day to day, which is, I love that. And I think that's such a good way to set up goals as well.
Yes.
Right. Just like, just like looking forward. 'Cause I have goals as a young person. I know so many of us do.
I love the word goals. I think this is about goals.
Yeah.
This is about how your financial life informs your life goals. And some of those life goals should reflect your sense of purpose in your life.
Yeah.
Because, we all know that that's kind of what drives a flourishing life in a full sense. So how do you connect your budget so it's not just about surviving to some of the goals that might be on your heart?
Yeah.
And I use the word heart, not mind there for folks listening. It really is about the heart.
Yeah.
And then how do you connect that with purpose? Because those goals should be infused with a sense of, hey, I'm wanting to do more than just get from A to B.
Yeah.
I want to make a contribution along the way.
Totally. I love that. And I think, it's a very overwhelming space at the moment, especially, we're in Sydney and it's just like constantly like, so much is happening. And so maybe for someone who is feeling a bit overwhelmed, what's like a good way to kind of start building like a realistic budget with like where we're at as a city?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. There's a couple of things that I wrestle with along the way here.
Yeah.
And I'm fast forwarding to the journey towards purpose.
Yeah.
But along the way, I had to stop at a kind of, it's almost a pit stop, really.
Yeah.
And it's called contentment, right? And I
Yeah.
think for me personally, and I'm not saying this is universal, it may not be for anyone listening in, but in terms of building the spreadsheet, we can talk through the mechanics.
Yeah.
And it is a spreadsheet in my life, right?
Yeah.
Okay, just to be really crude and simple about it.
Love that, yeah.
But I had to sit back and go, actually, hang on. Often we think about our budget in terms of what we don't have, but there's a wonderful healing and process to kind of go, actually, what do we have here?
Yeah, I love that.
And sitting in a place called contentment where you go, hang on, I've got enough income to pay my expenses.
Yeah.
Okay. And I have enough income to pay my rent. Or maybe I may have to house share, which is what I had to do as a young person, to pay my rent. Okay. That doesn't mean I'm going to stay there forever.
Yeah.
Okay. But in the short term, really breaking down my budget into those income lines, and some of that may be, it might be casual work, it might be a mix of things. For me, growing up, that was definitely true. It was a combination of different income sources, some of which I could rely on more than others, and understanding how those patterns work, and seeing how the maths kind of added up over time. And in some ways, learning to trust that as well. Because where there's uncertainty in income, and we have a very casualised workforce, certainly I had that in my the early part of my journey here, you've got to learn to trust that your own endeavours, as well as a sense of provision will follow into that, and seeing those patterns in the way that your budget plays out and how you live out your budget is really powerful.
Yeah.
But you have to know your expenses.
Yes.
So this is part of the journey, really breaking down not just the common expenses, because it's so easy to go, there's my rent, I'm going to pay for bread, I'm just going to live on bread the whole time. I'm not going out, I'm not doing anything, I'm just living on bread.
2-minute noodles.
2-minute noodles. Yeah. And you sort of have to get to a place where you go, hang on, I'm going to be realistic with myself.
Yes, totally.
I'm a big fan of living as you live. I know that's profound.
Crazy.
Write that down.
Yeah.
Write that down.
Title of the podcast.
There you go. Living as you live. Right?
Yeah.
Because there's so much denial of self that goes on here.
Yeah.
And we become bitter about it along the way. Right. Whereas contentment looks like, actually, I've understood what my realistic expenses are. I'm not talking about indulgence. And I think there's a generational thing here where folks get a little bit of a bad rep. You've heard about the avocado thing. You guys are all out just eating avocado toast. I hear it. I see it. Me personally, never do it. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
The reality is, it's not about denial. It's about stewardship. And what stewardship means, and whether you're a person of faith or whether you're listening in with a broader sense of values for your reference, it's really about taking the resources that have been given to you and really being honouring with that and maximising the potential of that, right?
Yeah.
Now, for me, that means living as you live. Right?
Yeah.
So not curtailing everything, right?
Yeah.
but recognizing that as a human, you're built for community.
Yeah.
You're built to live in the world.
Yeah.
And so factor that into your budget. Factor your humanity into your budget.
Yeah.
Not in a way
Totally.
that's egregious and beyond what your capacity is, but just reflecting real principles of living life, but also accumulating thoughtfully for those goals and objectives that you talked about earlier that are on your heart, right?
Yeah.
And you start to put that into the spreadsheet of things, which is income, less expenses, equals surplus. And I was about to say profit, but that's not what we're talking about here, because we're talking about a budget for living. Surplus, which might accumulate to become saving, and later on down the track, potentially investing. And so part of this is this journey of, I think, being reflective, be comfortable in who you are, be content with what you have, and then start to lay goals and that are leading you into the improvement and the expansion of that situation. Now, improvement and expansion, big words. I'm really just talking about another thing called vision. Like, you have to have a little bit of vision for your life, you know? And so your budget starts to become an enabler of that. So for folks listening in, that might look like, hey, I'm house sharing today. I do want to have a little bit more space for myself, so I want to rent on my own. Okay, that's a goal. You've laid it out really well. What's the purpose of that goal? You know, you might want to be a host of a community at some point, right? To gather people. Because there is a lot of loneliness out there as well. And if you have the capacity to have space, then you can be a host of a community. You can bring people into that space and share more of your life with them, right? So you can see how suddenly a budget comes to life with purpose. Right? And when you put purpose into something as simple as, hey, you know what, I want to move out of my house share. All right, or move out from living with my family, as generous and beautiful as that situation may be, or difficult as it may be, whatever that dynamic is, that you can put purpose into that move, right? And then you might go and say, listen, it's really hard to buy in this city at the moment. This is a really tough part of the world to buy a house in, or an apartment, or any form of kind of residence, right? So how do I start to lay a plan towards that? You know, and this is not about me getting on here and being naive, you know, kind of boomer that I am, right? But the idea is to actually say, hang on, you can build on this. And there's lots of ways to get exposure to property markets, because this is, I'm touching on this lightly, because it can be a bit of a raw nerve in our country today, where housing affordability is a really big challenge, where, you know, you've got different strategies to get exposure, fractional housing, shared equity, all of these different strategies exist. So, but it starts by understanding where you are.
Totally.
Where you are, where you want to go, and then discerning the way forward to get there in a way that reflects both contentment as well as vision. So
that's amazing. I'm already learning so much, honestly. I love, getting vision. It just like, because I feel like I'm very visual as well. So just being able to put like a picture to like, I want to host people. I want to be able to invite people into a space that's like just mine. And like, I love that. That's so good. And then maybe we can talk about now kind of some of the mistakes that we've made. Maybe you've made. I mean, I feel like something that you've already touched on is just like that, being realistic with yourself. The amount of times I've been like writing out a budget and I'm like, wait, I've completely deleted my social life from this budget. This is not realistic. So if you have like any more ideas of mistakes.
So many. Some of which, you know, is just naivety on my part. Some of it is good intentions poorly executed. I wonder if they're similar things, but anyway. The reality is I've done both of excess in terms of self-indulgence, all the way through to self-denial. Okay? I've taken risks, financial risks that shouldn't have been taken at the stage of life or capacity that I was at. And so part of this is why I kind of come back to this whole idea. Like, if you're self-denying to the point where you're not going out, you're creating isolation in your life, or you are not allowing yourself to, in a sense, live the life that you've been called to live, right? You know, and that's a life of community and purpose and connection and all those sorts of things. Then that's not a good place to be. And you might have to make some hard choices and some structural choices about your budget. You know, where you live, how you live. You know, not just the occasional going out, but actually looking at the structural things to promote that. And some part of me went through this cycle of learning to do that and recognizing that, hey, you know what, sometimes you've got to take a step back in order to take a step forward. And that statement may play out differently for different people in their context. But there's also a little bit of ego in what I'm describing as well, and recognizing that stepping back is not necessarily giving up, but making adjustments to get your foundations right, you know. The other extreme of what I've done is I've overspent. You know, there's been times in my life where I just presumed that thing that, you know, the holiday that I had to have was not the holiday that I would like to have, but I had to have. And so then moving past that picture of, for myself anyway, and by the way, for everyone on this call, this might sound differently, but for me, it was kind of like I had to move past this sense of, in a couple of areas of my life, entitlement or expectation. You know, and recognize that actually I was just in a stage where maybe the house that I lived in, or the car that I drove, or maybe the level of autonomy and independence I had, or the holidays that I got to have or not have, depending on how you look at it, just looked different. You know, and so the way I had to journey both of these things was about coming back to this central point of, I'm living the life that I'm called to live, but I'm also doing that from a place of contentment and not a sense of lack. All right, and most of the mistakes I've made is when I've got that kind of out of whack. You know, other things, and may not be relevant to your audience, Charlotte, is for those that have started to take investing into the equation. You know, there's lots of different instruments out there. Things like Bitcoin have started to come out. There's lots of different levels of risk that you can take. It's just, again, it comes back to the balance of these things. Am I taking risks that I shouldn't take? Am I understanding the things that I'm taking? Now, I'm not disparaging one instrument over the other, but it's just holding that in balance. And I think for me, when it came to budgeting mistakes, you can see how quickly this is a mirror to life mistakes in some ways.
Totally.
It's learning to hold those things in your life in order to then get that fully and realistically, to use your word, expressed into your budget.
I love that. And touching again on like the living in Sydney thing that we're both doing. What are kind of some things that, like, because I feel like I find things just pop up all the time. It's like, oh my gosh, how's I supposed to anticipate this? Are there any kind of expenses that young people maybe aren't aware of that can be kind of aware and plan and structure their budget around?
So living in Sydney, living in the world, the big things that I hear folks talk about, they often forget to factor taxes in. Okay.
Yes,
They'll often get things like their help garnished from their salaries once they hit a certain threshold.
Yes.
That's a hidden little expense that creeps up suddenly. Causes distress and a little bit of anger. Once we forget that it's actually a debt that's facilitating education, until you've seen the full benefit of that education, it is painful, right? We also forget that inflation actually exists. It's a real thing, right? And it hits differently in different parts of your expenses. So we'll forget, for example, that in a city like Sydney, with all of its different and complex challenges when it comes to housing, things like rental inflation. Many folks will have been hit by that pretty hard in the last little while. Now, not predictable in some ways, predictable in other ways. If again, holding that dynamic intent, because it comes down to how much emphasis you put on that, how much, I guess, information you seek out on that, right? So the other stuff that really pops out for me is little costs, like the cost of petrol is a serious thing.
Totally,
You know, tolls is a serious thing.
Yes, the tolls thing. When I got my first car, I was like, "Excuse me."
Yeah,
I was not aware of this.
Yes. Yeah. And so then you start to weigh what is actually what does transport look like? You know, when, as a young person who's able to drive, there's a kind of taking for granted of driving. You know, whereas we've got a transportation system that maybe should be utilised.
Totally.
Right? And I struggle with this. I'm not saying it's easy, but sometimes it's better to take the bus because you've got a combination of tolls or petrol. Registration. This is the other. Registration and insurances.
That's a big one.
They're big ticket items that just exist. Some folks go without certain types of insurance, and that's maybe appropriate for the stage of life. I think it's about, so I won't give a blunt answer to some of these things.
Totally,
but in terms of awareness of these expenses, some of these things can add up to thousands of dollars over a year, if you think annually from a budget perspective. But they're experienced on a daily basis.
Totally,
And so my observation, Charlotte, is it's about really sifting your actual costs. tracking them, understanding them, and building that into your budget so you have a holistic picture. Because the headline costs, my rent, my food, big ticket items, no doubt.
Yeah.
That's not the whole picture here.
No.
The things that you and I have just dropped out casually are actually thousands of dollars when you add it all up. By the way, energy is not cheap for those that are experiencing that change in costs. Electricity has gone through the roof, gas has gone through the roof. So you can suddenly live in a world where that's there, but you can manage towards things you understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, with discernment, you can sit back and say, whereas if you're surprised to your and so the strategy question is, these are not unusual expenses. As I share them out, you're kind of going, oh yeah, I have all those, right?
Yeah.
You know, we all have all those in some ways, right? But really it's about knowing that for yourself.
Totally, yeah.
And then putting that into your budget. And so things like tracking the bank account become a really useful way of understanding what a realistic picture of your expenses are. And by the way, I'm not saying be controlled by this. I'm merely saying allow the information you gather through this process to help you manage more thoughtfully for your journey. So that it's kind of like, here are all the problems, but here's a simple way to start to resolve those problems.
Yeah. I love the tracking insight. That's such a good idea. Yeah. Just even like at the end of the year, even just like go back through bank account and just like look at all the things that kind of crept up.
Spot on.
Yeah, love that.
Look back in order to build forward.
Totally, yeah. And then maybe if you could share some insight into like kind of how you set goals for your personal life. Like what was like kind of the reasoning or the why behind certain goals that you set? Yeah.
So big part of my journey has been my faith.
Yeah.
My faith journey has informed my life journey. Shock horror.
Yeah.
Right? For some folks on this listening in, that will resonate with them, and that's exactly where they will be. For others listening in, you might have a broader values framework that informs the way that you choose to live. You might debate this for yourself, Charlotte, but as I quote unquote matured, those things started to become much more important to me.
Yeah, right.
And I started to reflect on what it is that I wanted to get out of life, but also contribute through my life, right? And you start to make decisions on the basis of that. You start to think about longer term horizons, actually. The moment you start thinking about purpose, you start to think about longer term horizons.
Yeah.
Like, what may it look like to change the way that I work to make a contribution through my work?
Yeah.
You know, what may it look like to make decisions about family, to have children?
Yeah.
You know? Now, that may not be for everybody, okay? But it may be for some. There's opportunities and there's costs that flow from all of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
What may it look like to choose where I live in order to reflect those two priorities that I might have discerned?
Totally.
You know, that maybe where I live could reflect the priorities in my life. And the reason I name the where I live is often the where I lived is a big part of your cost picture.
Totally, yeah.
Now, you can make choices about where you live in order to enable your life, or you can make choices about where you live in order to reflect the kind of picture of your life that you want people to see.
Yeah.
And so part of my maturity has been to say, hang on, to learn to care less about the image that I create, but more about the substance that I'm living with.
Yeah.
And that has been a stripping back, if you will.
Yeah.
And I think that's an ongoing process,
Totally.
by the way.
Yeah.
That allows me to then actually have a very different relationship with money.
Yeah.
You know, I don't need to be perceived this way.
Yeah.
I can actually just live the way I have been made to live. Right?
Yeah.
Or choose to live, depending on how much emphasis you want to place on those two things. Right?
Yeah. And
so there's been a bit of a dynamic there for me that's started to inform how I think about my relationship with money, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think, like we said at the top, even like at the core of all this is kind of that idea of purpose and stewardship.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to just hear like kind of your heart behind where that's come from for you.
Yeah.
And kind of maybe like the best way to look at it, or the best way to kind of come under, you know, how much money can impact our life.
Totally.
Yeah.
So for me, when it comes to purpose and stewardship, as I said, big part of it has been my faith journey. And the reality that as part of that, I guess my heart was awakened to the fact that I'm pretty privileged. I live in a beautiful country with lots of resource, and there's a sense of real blessing to be reflected on and discerned there. And through that, a sense of like, how can I make a contribution that's bigger than I am?
Yeah.
And certainly for the things that are seen, the things that are deliberately around me, so the communities I live in, and I flourish in, but also those communities that are overseas and maybe a little bit distant, and how I can think about how I might express a sense of love through generosity for that. So things like giving become a bigger part of my personal journey as a result of those kind of anchoring or foundational truths that emerged in my life. And so then when you come back to this topic of budgeting, well, I actually believe to be a steward, you've got to be intentional.
Yeah.
So budget for these things.
Yeah.
If you're going to give, don't make giving a random exercise.
Yeah.
Make
so
it a
good.
planned exercise.
Yeah.
Right? People, and by the way, this misnomer, and I know you know this, but for those folks listening in as well, this misnomer that quote unquote giving, or other words for this might be philanthropy, is the domain of the ultra wealthy.
Yeah.
I think you can shift that mindset.
And
and you can give in small ways that still reflect a generous outlook, and a realization that in many ways in this country we're so blessed. Not without our challenges, but we're so blessed. Yeah. And so I started to think about the increment or the margin in the way that I steward, right? How do I give out of what I have, right? How do I intentionalize my planning so that I actually have the life that I want to live? So, hey, you know what? Maybe I can forego a small, as I think about my career journey, some dollars in order to have purpose in my work.
Yeah.
Right. How can I think about the way that I spend my money so that it still gives me joy, but maybe reflects some of this intentional, purposeful living that I'm describing. Right. Yeah. And so for me, I found this idea that I can be generous, that I can be a generous steward, has emerged out of this reflection on what are my big whys. You know? And a lot of that for me personally is out of my faith, which is a Christian faith for those that are listening. But for you, it might be out of your values more broadly. It might be informed by other dynamics that that drive who you are. But weaving that in to something, and I know we come back to this, like this budget, you know, this unbelievable, but the trophy budget we're building here. Yeah. But it's about intentionality. Yeah. I want to give, so I'm going to plan to give. Yeah. I want to have a career with purpose, so I'm going to plan for that. And that's going to inform the way that I think about my financial life. Yeah. Because all this budget's doing is enabling me to live the life that I'm purposed to live. Yeah.
Yeah, I love, that's perfect. And like even we were at church yesterday.
Yes.
I loved what the message was about, which was so much like, you know, this is a temporary place on earth.
Totally.
You know, like I do want to have an impact on people with generosity and, you know, having eyes to see people in my world that can be blessed by that. So it's such a good, like you said, to be intentional with it. I think also just like kind of makes it easier.
Totally.
Like just being like, I'm going to set aside this for this month so that I can have space for that.
And I love that. By the way, that whole, that concept of, in the end, we leave it all behind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is an absolutely powerful way of framing these decisions.
Yeah.
Now, when I talk about that, I'm not talking about wild risks.
Yeah.
Right? I'm talking about purposeful, intentional stewardship. Right?
Yeah.
I love the idea that whether you're a person of faith on the line or whether you're coming at this with a broader sense of responsibility and values or citizenship or community, whatever frame of reference is coming into this for the people on the line that are listening, right? Ultimately, there's one truth: we leave it all behind.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you can debate where we're going.
Yeah.
But no one's packing up their cash and taking it with them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So in the end, how do we make this the most impactful, purposeful life that we can live?
Yeah.
Right? And I think some part of this is which, for me, was so exciting to just talk about something as mundane as budgets, right?
Yeah.
Is really, it's about making the simplicity of your budget reflect all of those things that you want to see happen in the world, right? Not because you're the author of all of those things, but you get to play your small part.
Yeah.
And if we collectively play our own small part, then you might see big transformational things happen, right? And if we start with as simple as, what are the lines in my budget that enable me to live a life of contentment and yes, to prosper as well, but also to reflect the purpose in which I want to contribute to my community and the world at large. I think that is such a transformative way to think about something as, okay, historically mundane. Not after this podcast, of course, but absolutely. Historically mundane as a budget.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. And so kind of to last question for you.
Please.
We like to kind of give the listeners just like one thing to take away.
Yeah.
So if there was like one thing, if people are just tuning in now, what's like that one thing that you want people to hold on to? I think people should.
Your budget, and I'm coming back to that. We've talked about a great many things actually. We've covered life, values, purpose.
Yeah.
But in many ways, your budget should reflect the life you want to live.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. It's such a good perspective that I don't think we hear much of in the world. Just getting kind of fresh vision. And it's almost the end of the year.
It is.
We're mid-November now. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And so just like looking ahead to 2025, I feel like that's such a great place for us to kind of like take a moment to sit down and look at, even like I'll be doing this. I'll be looking at how my life is reflected in my spending from this past year. So it's such good stuff.
That's awesome. I'm excited. I think that if we can unlock this side of people's lives in lots of ways, I think it really releases the potential of our city.
Yeah, totally.
I think this is a city that has its challenges, but has so much potential. I think our community at large is awakening to this sense of stewardship and citizenship.
Yeah.
And the contribution that, even though sometimes we feel isolated and individual, how the collective citizenship and stewardship that we're talking about can be reflected in our individual decisions on a daily basis. Yeah. The collective is so transformative. Yeah. And for those on the line, I was going to say, but actually listening in is a different way to describe it. Yeah. This is not a phone call, it's a podcast. The idea that they might have a faith motivation. Yeah. And totally. So this idea that you are living out your purpose as a steward, not of your resources, but of your creator's resources. Yeah. So think of this as the difference between owning something and seeing the intention of your creator reflected through your decisions as a steward of someone else's capacity, provision, whatever it may be. So there's that layer, I think, for those that are on who are listening in that are people of faith, I think is a really important point to reflect on. For sure. For those that may be coming at this from a broader values perspective, hey, you know what? There is this sense of corporate stewardship, community living that drives behaviours that should be reflected in the daily decision making. Yeah. As well. Yeah, I love it. Well, that's all we have time for. Charlotte, so much fun. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it. Good. We've been so blessed by you, but yeah, I feel like we're gonna have to do like a part 2 because it's just fun. It's fun to chat. I'm enjoying the conversation. So yes, let's make that a thing. Yeah. Let's do a part 2. Great. If your listeners will have it. Yeah, please. I'm sure they will. We'll wait for the feedback. Yes, we will. Awesome. But thank you so much. Thanks, mate. Thanks, appreciate guys. Wow. Yeah. Sam, thank you for joining us. Seriously, it's so good. We're actually already planning a part 2. Oh, good. Like for 2025. Yep. So stay tuned. We're going to talk like superannuation, like investing, all the questions that we have that are so hard to find the answers for. I've got some tax questions. Tax, absolutely. So, yeah. Oh, man. If you ask me, like, what's something you should have learned at school? Oh. How to do a tax return. Honestly. How to change a tire. For the last 2 years, have done it on the last day. Yeah, it's stressful. October 31st. Yep. I've done it on the last day. Halloween. Yeah. Yeah. Doomsday. Good. Doomsday. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us, Sam. Seriously, such fun. And he's made for podcasting. Oh, good. Let's get him back. Yeah. Come on. Let's get him back. Maybe he can replace you as the host. Okay. I'm kidding. Oh gosh. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys. Great. One of our last episodes of the year. We have one more after this. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. It's going to be good. We'll see you next time, guys. Next time. Bye.
This podcast is produced by C3 SYD Church. We exist to know Jesus, find community, and discover purpose. For information, head to c3syd.church, and for more content, go to @SYDLife.podcast. Help us reach more people in Sydney by sharing this episode with a friend. See you next time.